Kirsty Nancarrow is the author of Himalayan Dreams, the Story of Som Tamang, which was published in February. Kirsty is an award-winning journalist who spent 15 years with the ABC and founded Women in Media Far North Queensland. She is now a media trainer and the co-director of eMotion video training and production. Kirsty wrote Himalayan Dreams after a life-changing visit to Nepal following the 2015 earthquake. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, Kirsty.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Could you tell us, please, about Himalayan Dreams?
That's a big question in terms of what it is. It is the biography of Som Tamang. Som is a Nepalese-born Australian. He's lived in Cairns, where I live, for almost 21 years. And we first met in 2015 after the earthquake, as you said. And he's not the first Nepalese person that I had met in my life, but certainly his personal story and the work that he did stopped me in my tracks. So it is a biography, but it also, I think, crosses into other genres. It's a travel book. It's a bit of cultural history. It's got stories of some of the young people he's helped change their lives. And it's a little bit of my story as well, and some of the other volunteers who've gone and spent some time in Batasi village, where Som's from.
Okay. Can you tell us about kind of the moment that you first met Som, and then how long it was before you said to yourself, I should write a book, and then I will write a book?
I first met Som a couple of days after the 2015 earthquake. It was on Anzac Day for us, and Som was just having a normal day in Cairns with his family. They went to the Anzac Day commemorations, and it wasn't until they got home and the phone was ringing that they realised what was happening over in Nepal. And magnitude 7.8 earthquake had struck. And ultimately 9,000 people died in that tragedy, including Som's brother, who was very instrumental at the time in the school. He was a school president, and he was also heading up Friends of Himalayan Children in Nepal. So I discovered that we had a local Nepali citizen in Cairns that was affected by the earthquake, and the next working day, Monday for me at the ABC, I reached out to Som and asked if he would be happy to do an interview. And he really surprised me by the invitation and the welcome that I received at his home. He was very accommodating and just matter-of-factly explained what had happened, showed me photos of the school that had been reduced to rubble in the earthquake before, and did a story about his plan to go back to Nepal as soon as possible to help his own village, but also a lot of other remote villages, because he was concerned all of the effort would be on Kathmandu and the Himalayan trails, which the Nepal government is very reliant on for income. So he was worried that there would be a double tragedy, that there would be the destruction from the earthquake, but then things like starvation and lack of water and lack of shelter for people in remote villages. So he quickly mobilized some resources and took a volunteer with him, and was on a plane a few days after the earthquake back to the village, and did what he could to distribute rice and supplies and just emergency aid. And that was one of 3 visits that he made during the year back to Nepal. So that was my first meeting, and I was struck by how calm he was, how open he was. It was almost like if something like that had happened to my family and my community, I don't know how I'd be holding it together at that point.
Yeah.
But that was something that really struck me the first time I met Som. And you asked how long after that did I decide to write a book? Well, I didn't initially know any of Som's story when I first met him. The focus was very much on the disaster response and his organisation, Friends of Himalayan Children. And there were children in the hostel that had been injured during the earthquake. Thankfully, none of them died. So I kept following his visits back and forth and doing update stories for the ABC. And we had actually organised for a 7:30 crew to go to the village with him. So they travelled back to Batasi when he first went there. So the world got to see some of the impact in the lesser known places in Nepal, which really helped. But there was lots of fundraising campaigns, and he actually asked me if I would MC an International Women's Day event the following year, 2016, as a bit of a fundraiser to try and get things happening again, because the hostel had been destroyed, the school had been destroyed. So yeah, that's really how I became a little bit more involved in knowing about him and his work. And it was on that night that we started sponsoring the first of the girls that we sponsor. And my husband's stipulation was find a girl and find the youngest, and that means we can support her for the longest time. So I think I started thinking about me going to Nepal to help at that point. So let's say almost 12 months after the tragedy had happened. And then the real impetus for me to go was a bit of a personal crisis, I suppose. I'd become the chief of staff at the ABC, and I didn't know it at the time, but I started seeing changes in my personality and was diagnosed with depression. And ultimately, quite a long time after that, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And so I got to a point where my work was being very much affected by the trauma that I had been covering for my career. And I stepped out.
That, just to be clear, was that a cumulative effect of your career as a journalist?
Yes, yes. There were a couple of incidents in particular that were, I suppose, icing on the cake or nail in the coffin, or however you want to phrase it. But yeah, just cumulative trauma. I was in Alice Springs for a long time and covered a lot of horrible murders and such. And then Far North Queensland had its share as well, and personal tragedies, natural disasters. So they all kind of chipped away, and I ended up stepping out for a while, having some leave. And it was during that time that I thought, well, now is the time that I can go to Nepal and try and rediscover my sense of worth and purpose. So yeah, it was after coming back from that trip, my first trip to Batasi village, where I volunteered in the school for a month, that I first went. I came back with two goals or two realizations. One was I didn't want to be a journalist anymore. I wanted to find a way of training people and using this newfound love of teaching as a career. And secondly, that I could see Som's work and the impact it had, and I really thought this is a story worth telling as a book. They say everyone's got a book in them, and until this point, I didn't know that this was going to be my book. But it was almost the pieces after that process kept aligning, so that if I tried to ignore it, it kept sort of coming up as you're meant to do this. So it's a long process. So 2016 was when I actually went to the village, and the book, as you said, was only out earlier in 2024. So there was a long process between the concept of writing it at the end of 2016 to it being a finished book. And of course, you can have these goals and dreams of doing something, but a lot of things need to happen before you can make that happen. And for me, it was, freeing myself up to do it, and also realizing that I could do it, because you have a lot of self-doubt, and we're used to instant gratification as a journalist, and you come in and you punch out a bunch of stories, and then the next day is a new
headline comes out.
And you've got all of this work to show for it, and that's not what a book is like. So it did take a while for the pieces to align for me to write the book, and that was very much ended up going back to the ABC, but moving into another job at Queensland Health in Comms. And I thought, I'll just do this for a while and then I'll write the book. And I think another 3 years passed. And my husband's like, yeah, you know that book that you were going to write and that business that you were going to do? He said, if you stay in the workforce, none of these things are going to happen. So we squirreled a bit of money away for a bit of a buffer zone. And then the ultimate sort of reinforcement from the universe, I got a grant from the Cairns Regional Council for a regional arts development grant to write Som's story. And then it was all systems go. And that was 2020.
Terrific. And grants are hard to come by. Well done on securing it.
Thank you. It was my second attempt, so I didn't get it the first time, and listened to the feedback and regrouped and submitted
And that
another
gave
application.
you time, because you did a huge amount of research. Could you use that for your travel costs and things like that?
No, the grant was just for my time writing the book.
Okay.
So none of those other costs were covered. So I'd gone over there at my own expense.
Right.
I'd subsequently gone over there in 2018 to do the research for the book, which involved me going to Everest Base Camp. I hadn't planned on that, but that was my opportunity. That was when Som and his partner Susan were going to be over there. And some of the girls that I'd taught 2 years before were my trekking guides. So it was perfect. So I had a complete immersion for 2 weeks with them all, and was able to get all the interviews I needed for the book during that time, and with Som's family in the village. So the research happened in 2018, and I was starting to gather all this material, knowing that I would eventually put it in a book, but not necessarily having the means to do it yet.
Just for listeners who I'm sure would be interested, what was the name of the grant that you obtained?
It's the Regional Arts Development Fund, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, at least every council in Queensland, if not Australia, has this grants program. There's usually a couple of rounds a year, and it's a $10,000 grant.
Fantastic.
And it will not cover, certainly in the case of the Cairns Regional Council, it did not cover anything to do with publishing. It only covered the writing costs. So yeah, grants are hard to get. I have applied for a few, and this is the only one I've secured for the book. But if you don't put your hat in the ring, then you've got no chance, right?
Of course. And the project has merit. Absolutely. What did the conversation, how did that go with Som when you said to him, I would like to write your biography?
I remember him being quite receptive to it and saying something like, oh, this is something that I would like to happen, or I've had conversations before with someone about this. I know that he did talk to a local independent publisher here a few years before about the idea of getting his story written, but for him it was never something he would be going to be doing himself. So he was quite receptive to the idea that I had approached him and said, I would really like to write your story. I guess he had a bit of apprehension, more actually towards the end of the process, when it was getting close, about the fact that I was doing a book about him, because he's very humble, and he's always been sort of outwardly focused, not inwardly focused. And I think he was concerned about this book being about him. And I said, look, for me, this is a vehicle to educate people about what goes on in Nepal, what people can do to help, and just bring people into your world. So trying to give him some comfort around the fact that it wasn't just a gratuitous story about him. It was a vehicle for changing things. And he has done so much change, he's brought about so much change, just one person in his own life, but all of the lives around him, that I really thought it was a story that had a lot of merit to a worldwide audience. And
absolutely, he's so inspiring. He's so
one of the best ways of doing that.
And perhaps you could tell listeners about his own personal story and how, let's talk about Som.
So, as I mentioned at the beginning, on my first meeting of Som, I knew nothing about his history, and it wasn't until I started to get to know him better that I learnt what he'd been through, and kind of connected the dots with why he was so driven to make these changes and improve the lives for the next generation in his village. Som grew up in a place called Patassi. It's about 2 days walk for you and I from Kathmandu, and it overlooks the Langtang Range in the Himalayas. It's quite high up. It's about 1,800 meters above sea level. It's a poor farming community. Education is not, or has not been, a priority, and certainly not something that was ever considered necessary for girls. When Som was a child, his father didn't even want him to go to school. He wanted Som to be just involved in farming and helping with the chores and the day-to-day running of the family and the subsistence farming that keeps people going in these places. And his mum really wanted him to go to school. He had showed a strong desire to do that. So he got to go to school. He helped get money for his family by selling berries down in the villages below, several hours walk away, even as a young child. And he got to go to school. But at that stage, his school only went to year 5. So you had to go to a village several hours away to continue your education. And he did that for briefly, but it didn't really, it was very hard. He was labouring to fund his education, his accommodation away from home, you know, turning up to school, being quite grotty and sweaty and being picked on for that. But just doing what he could to try and keep himself educated. And then he gets this invitation from a village, he refers to him as a village uncle, to come to Kathmandu and be placed with a family who would adopt him essentially and send him to school. And he could actually have his desire of finishing his education. So he jumped at that, and he didn't tell his family. He just packed a bag and went with this man to Kathmandu.
And he was what age then?
Age 10.
10.
Age 10. So, and when he got to Kathmandu, it soon dawned on him what the situation was. He was placed with a family, and they had their own children, and instead of being sent to school and looked after as one of their own, he was their essentially slave. He was involved in cooking, cleaning, taking their own children to school, not having any time to go himself, and sleeping under the stairs in conditions he describes as worse than we would care for our dogs. And yeah, he was in that situation with 2 different families for a couple of years. So yeah, can you imagine being 10 years old and that being your life, being plucked out of your, albeit poor existence, but a loving family where everyone's part of a community and everyone helps each other out, and you get to go to school to a place where it's lonely and you're basically being treated like an animal, reminded every day that you're from a different class, and basically being put to work without the reward of either payment or schooling. So that was his situation, and it was from that moment that he wanted for that not to happen to his siblings, and beyond that, the other children in his village. And that's basically what his work has stopped. So came back, tried to resume his education. He did escape from that situation after 2 years, found his way back to Batassi, then started to fight for his sister to go to school because his elder sister didn't get to go. And that sort of started this chain of events of enabling more and more family members first, and then other members in the community to go to school.
Can you tell people about the incident where he was sleepwalking and what happened? I mean, that just blew my mind.
Yeah, so we take for granted the fact that we've got ready access to medical help, and in places like this, even to this day, there's no clinic there in Batassi. You have to jump on a bus and take a precarious journey down to another village, and the clinic is very basic. So if you've got any sort of complex issues, they're sending you to the capital. And at this stage, when Som was only, I think he was even younger, I think he was about 7, he was prone to sleepwalking. So he'd walked off the top floor of his family's home, landed on something sharp on his head, and then the next minute he realizes that he's in quite a serious way, bleeding everywhere. His parents had been asleep, so it took him a while to wake up, and they did what they could do. And his father was, his grandfather at that stage was the village shaman and witch doctor.
Witch doctor, amazing, yeah.
So they used the remedies that they had access to, herbs and medicines and tinctures, and tried to treat this horrible head wound that Som had sustained. And they knew that they probably needed to get some medical help. So his auntie was the only one that actually spoke any Nepali. They speak the Tamang language. There's a lot of dialects in Nepal, as there are in our Aboriginal culture in Australia, and there was a fear that they wouldn't be able to communicate so well when they got to the clinic. Anyway, she walks with him, carries him for 6 hours down the hill to the clinic, and they immediately have a look and say, we can't deal with this, you need to go to the hospital in the city. And of course they didn't know how to get there, they had no means to get there, so they walked all the way home with no resolution. And there was an acceptance that Som would die, and they continued to try and treat the wound as they felt they could, but it was getting worse over time. And I think almost a year had passed when some lost tourists happened upon the village, and they had some medication, and once they shared that with Som, his wound started to heal. And that was his first contact really with foreigners, and
that left an incredible impression. The fact that he was bleeding from the head, or had an open wound on his head for 1 year, was just, it's incredible that he survived the infections and that kind of thing. And how you go about life as a kid with an open wound on your head that's really tough.
Yeah, and we're talking about an environment where there's no continuous power, there's no continuous water supply. People are doing everything from a bucket. So very, very hard to keep infection control in the way that we. So a lot of it is just left to the gods, and people accept.
Stroke of luck. He was lucky. Can you please tell us the kind of arrangement you had with Som, as much as you're happy to share about how that works and how someone might approach someone that they're interested in writing about?
Yeah, so this was obviously new to me and new to Som. Neither of us had been in this space before, so I knew we had to have some kind of agreement in place because this is a huge undertaking, right? And I presented 3 options on the table. I said either I'd done some research, and I said the options are you pay me to write this for you, and then this is your project, and it's yours to do what you want to with. And he said that wasn't possible. I said the second option is that you go and source funding, like a philanthropist, to fund this project. And he said, I don't know where to start, and I don't think I can do that either. And I said the third option is I take this on as a project myself. I bear all of the costs and the time and the risk, and I am the one that tries to get it published, and then I will keep the anything that I get from the book. And he said yes, that's the option that we need to go with, because he didn't it was just time-wise, money-wise, it wasn't going to work any other way.
Yeah, sure.
So yes, I took on this huge risk, I suppose, with no guarantee that I would ever recoup, and no one ever does, right? I will never recoup anything close to the time and money that I've invested in this project. But I felt so strongly about it that I thought I have to write this book. It's a legacy thing, and I felt like Som needed to be honoured in that way. So I took on that project on that basis. So
that's wonderful. Did you have an arrangement as well that you would do a series of interviews over a certain amount of time, and that would continue until completion?
Yeah, it was not so structured. I would just and the irony is that Som had been working just for himself. They have a fair trade shop with Nepalese goods at a shopping centre in Cairns, and they run Take On Nepal, which is a trekking business. And then they have the charity as well, which is 100% volunteer run. No one draws a wage from that. But because of COVID and the trekking stopping dead in Nepal, and Som needing to assist all of his trekking guides with continuing to be able to feed their families, he then had to get a job here. So he ended up going and working as a residential youth worker, and they're as scarce as hen's teeth. And there's a high burnout rate. So if you start in that career, you're very popular and you're never without work. So almost to the day when I was able to start the project, because you can't actually start writing it until the grant kicks in, was when he got the job, and I hardly had any access to him. So it was a good thing that I'd had the interviews with him prior to that in 2018 and a couple of times after that. But of course, there were many things that I needed to go back to him, and he's not very forthcoming. So a lot of the things that we would think were noteworthy, he certainly didn't. So it wasn't until I started talking to lots of other people and piecing the stories of his life together that I would say, oh, Som, I need to sit down with you and talk about this part of your life and that incident. And he was quite willing to do that, but it was a matter of time and logistics. And so sometimes it was very early in the morning, or when he'd just come off a night shift, or at night when I'd be going around to his place after his children went to bed. And we just kind of had to fit in the interviews, or in the shop. So the interviews happened all over the place, in my house, in his house, in the shop.
Wow. And you interview such key people in his life, that did he sort of say, you know, you can talk to everyone and anyone, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he didn't put any restrictions on
what you could ask, or
what I could ask, who I could ask that of. Yeah, he very much gave me carte blanche with the project. It was my project to tell his story in the way that I felt it needed to be told. And I really appreciate that, because it was daunting, because I wanted to do justice to his story. So, but I'm also a journalist, and I'm used to, you know, having balance and challenging and whatnot. So, yeah, I did a range of interviews with people and presented information to him and asked for feedback on things, and that's how it all came together. So I interviewed, I think, over 40 people for the book. There's more than 50 people named in the book. So, and all of those were little different parts that helped paint the whole picture of his life.
I'm very impressed. Did you send him the early manuscript once it was completed?
No, what I did was actually read it to him as I was writing it. So, yeah, so I would be going around there and reading chapters that he and his partner Susan would be coming over for dinner, and I'd be reading them chapters, and ultimately gave the manuscript to him, and he got his partner Susan to read it to him in entirety as well. So that's really how that happened. And then when the book was going through the edits, again, I sent the final draft to them to go through with a fine-tooth comb and say, please, if there's anything that needs to be changed. Because again, the time is a different concept to us than it is in Nepal. So there's not such attention to detail to how old I was or what year that happened. So it was frustrating for me, being really detail focused and wanting to get it right. I was trying to corroborate things in the end with Facebook posts of,
yes.
And I thought, well, they've posted that at that time, so I know that that's the chronology for that event.
Yes, I did that with my memoir. It's very helpful.
Yes. So that's really the process, I suppose, in getting the approval of the content. He left it open to me again in terms of chapter structure, and I didn't know, I kind of had a bit of a guide that I'd laid out before I started with how I thought it would flow. And I initially started with the earthquake because I thought that would be a point of connection for people who knew nothing about Nepal, because it was such a major event. And then in the process of trying to get it published traditionally, I had some feedback from a publisher that she thought we needed to get to know Som better and be invested in him before that disaster happened. So in the end, I've got a reference to it in the preface, but the book very much starts with painting the picture of where Som grows up and develops him as the character before. So it ended up being chronological. That wasn't my original intention, but that was I took the advice that I was given and hoped that would be the right choice for the reader too.
And can you tell us about the journey to publication?
Yeah, it was long and
arduous
and soul destroying, and I was warned that it would be hard. I did a lot of seminars and educated myself about
Yep.
how it worked, and prepared myself for a long process and some rejection. And yeah, it's hard.
Brutal.
I think 30 rejections. Some of them I got really close fairly soon after I started the process. I had the publisher on the hook, really loved the book, loved the story, but she could not get it over the line with the marketing team. And that's when I learned they don't look at anything unless they think they can make, sell 6,000 copies.
Yes.
So it becomes a much more commercial
decision. I know, which I think is at odds with great books and important books.
It is, and I get that publishing is a business and they have to make money. They have to keep employing people and keep the doors open. But it is brutal, and I knew that authors didn't get a lot from that process anyway. But I guess it was even harsher than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
So I had the people that bothered to get back to me, and a lot of them don't. Like you don't even get an acknowledgement that you've made a submission that you spent the whole weekend doing. Most of the time. But the ones that did respond, and I had some contacts of contacts, so I had some personal submissions that I made, which helps a little bit. And in those instances, I would generally hear back eventually from them. And it was always incredible story, so well written, just not for us. We think this book's going to do really well, but we're not taking it on. So I heard that. I heard a lot of that. And look, I did have a bit of a prejudice about independent publishing because I'm in Cairns, and there's a lot of people I run a business, and there's a lot of people in my business network that had gone through self-publishing at that time, and books were popping out everywhere. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be in that club. I believe so much in this story that I want the recognition, I suppose, that it's worth being in bookshops and it's worth being everywhere to everybody in the world. And then as the process dragged on, I thought, well, if I don't change my mind about this, then it may never see the light of day. And wouldn't that be a shame?
Yes.
For me and for Som and for all the people whose lives he's changed, and for all the people who could be involved in changing lives through being educated about what he does through this book, which was my aim. So I started talking to a independent publisher who just happens to live in Far North Queensland. She'd published books for several authors that I came to know, and was very highly regarded, and started exploring that as a process. And then once again, the universe kind of stepped in and went, this is how you got to go. So
which publisher was that?
So the Erudite Pen is who I published with.
iPen?
The Erudite Pen?
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah. Yes. And I knew that. Yeah. And what's her name again?
Dr. Juliet Lackmeyer.
Yes.
So she's got authors all over the world, and she's extremely proud of her authors and really goes into that. And I trusted her with the book and the edit, and just made having that independent publishing services just took the stress out of it. I mean, it was stressful, but all of those things that you don't even think about when you're writing a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And
how to upload it to the platforms to get it out for distribution, the cover artwork, all of those things that sort of are very specialized, that is a skill set I don't have. So at the point where I kind of accepted that I would be independently publishing, I just thought I now need to find out how I can pay for this, and was starting to apply for grants again. And then I get this email out of the blue. I'd done a book trailer a year before, and this woman had found me, and through an ABC story that someone and I done an interview. We'd presented at the Cairns Tropical Writers Festival a year before with the book, the manuscript having been finished but not published, and she'd seen an article that we'd done about the book, and she found me and reached out and said, oh, I have to get this book, where can I get it? And I said, well, you can't. I haven't published it yet because I don't have enough money to publish it myself, and I'm up to rejection number 30 in terms of international and Australian publishers I've approached. And she's never met me before. This is a woman in southeast Queensland, Elizabeth McLean, and she was so convinced by the value of this story that she asked me about the costs, and then she sent me a check in the mail to publish.
Oh my gosh! What?
So that's how this little baby came to life, because
what a fabulous person.
I know, right? And we finally got to meet her at the launch on the 2nd of March. She flew up just for the launch, and she has some connections with Cairns, and it was so good to finally meet her and thank her and honour her for making it happen. And she would say that she did very little but honestly, it's a lot of money. So
yeah,
without it, it may have just stayed on the never until maybe I got a grant at some point.
Kirsty, wow, that's an amazing. I wasn't expecting that. That's amazing. Yeah. Now, the media that you and Som have done has been fantastic, which shouldn't surprise me because it's an amazing story and you're a journalist. Yeah. But I do believe that a book published independently can do incredibly well in the media, and actually, because sometimes the stories are more interesting, the ones that are really commercially viable can be a bit to a journalist. Like these more unusual stories are actually gobbled up by journalists. So can you tell us about some of the media you've done and your media strategy with Nicole?
Yeah, so I was very much wanting to get the book out for International Women's Day this year, the 8th of March. And so really putting the heat on Juliet, my publisher, to get the book done. And she moved heaven and earth to do that for me and with me. So it was very stressful, kind of fast forwarding the process, because I only found out I had the means to publish the book at the beginning of September. And the book was out and launched in March. So it was a quick process. And then she says, I need a consent from every single person in the book. And most of them are in rural Nepal with no computer, no email, and in many cases, no language, literacy. So that was a huge challenge, but we made it happen. But yeah, I always was thinking as a journalist about the marketing of the book and when this would be, when I could get the most bang for the buck in terms of interest from journalists. And I thought International Women's Day, because even though this is a biography of a man, it's very much about a story of female empowerment, and the drive for Som has been making sure that his sister and other girls in the village did not get caught up in trafficking or child marriage. So I thought it's a really good, compelling, different International Women's Day story. And then I thought the second push would be around the earthquake anniversary, which was in April, the 25th of April. So I thought I've got two hooks, if you like. So my plan was always to have two kind of sweeps of trying to get media. And that's how it played out. So I did a media release focused on International Women's Day and another one focused on the earthquake, and tried to get media around that. I did end up retaining a publicist, Nicole Webb, for a short campaign, because as confident as I am in my own ability, and I was happy to write a media release and get out to the media that I knew and I had contact with, I knew that we only had a short window to really try and capitalize on this book being out. So I brought her in to help me try and get some of that higher profile media, and we ended up getting featured on Sunday Extra on Radio National, New Idea magazine, Take 5 magazine did a feature, and then I got a whole bunch of ABC stuff as well. I travel for work quite a bit, and everywhere I was going for work, I was trying to do a book talk or a book event. So I reached out to the ABC stations in the places that I visited and got some coverage there. Our local media gave us lots of coverage, so we've got a few newspapers and radio stations up here as well. So we've had a mix of good local coverage, national coverage, and across the platforms as well, magazine, TV. And a big coup was getting Som for 10 minutes on ABC News 24, writing a lead up to the 6 p.m. bulletin on Anzac Day. He happened to be back in Nepal, and I thought, this is really good. Like, I was initially thinking, it's disappointing that he's not here with me and we can't go and do an interview for television. And I thought, hang on a minute, of course we can. He's there. He's going to be back in Batassi. He's going to be able to tell everybody what it's like and how it's changed over the 9 years since the earthquake. So I asked if they could get me new footage of the school, of the hostel, and for Som to actually record a presentation to camera giving an update on what the situation was and how the community support from Australia has helped the community rebuild. And it was actually having that foresight to do that really got us that TV coverage that we were hoping for. So they were able to play all of those pictures as they were interviewing Som. So that was really good. So yeah, it's really satisfying when your story gets picked up. And I'm still going.
Well done.
I'm still yet to have any really high profile reviews. I got a review in the Pineapple, which is a newish Queensland independent magazine. I'm hoping that there's going to be something in the Weekend Australian very soon.
Fantastic.
So I haven't let go. I'm still pushing to get media coverage.
Great.
Yeah, around the events that I'm doing, and yeah, that it's, people think that when the book's out, that's it, that's the work done, but it's almost like it starts then.
Continuous marketing, and promotion. Som must be very grateful that you've come into his life and taken this enormous task on.
Yeah, he is, and he has acknowledged that at some of the events that we've been at. He hasn't been in the position to join me at a lot of them because of his own commitments. Unfortunately, his father recently passed away, so he's actually back in Nepal at the moment. But in between visits, he did a talk at the library with me recently, which was extremely well received. And every time he's there talking with me, we all learn something new. He's giving a little bit more away. So even if you've read the book, if you come to a talk, you're learning something new about Som's life. So I'm finding that really interesting. It's not like we are giving the same talk every time we're together. Every single talk is different. It's a different audience, and he's giving a little bit more of himself away, which is really nice to see.
And he's a skilled speaker, you say. He sounds like such a charismatic guy, but in an understated kind of way.
That's right. Like, you can listen to him for ages. We had the library talk. Yeah, had the library talk recently, and I think his first answer went for about half an hour, but no one was going to stop him because it was enthralling. And that's, yeah, he does have that charisma about him, and I think that's why he's been able to achieve so much in his life, because he's got that, and it's just like a bit of a magnetism draws people to him. So that's how he managed to have some of the adventures that he did that you'll find in the book with a couple of Australian actors and a mountaineer and a internet billionaire, not billionaire, an internet millionaire who gave him the money to start doing stuff in a very concrete way in his village, because he's got the gift of the gab, and he's compelling, and you just can't help but want to know more and to help.
Yeah, that's amazing. Just finally, what would your advice be for someone watching who would love to write a biography? Maybe they have someone in mind, or maybe they don't, but what would your advice be, and any kind of key learnings you had in embarking on your first biography?
Free yourself up to do it and take the time to do that properly, because I tried to do everything. I tried to stay in the workforce. I tried to drop a day a week and say that I was going to do the book and my business on that day, and that was never going to work. And then I tried 2 days, and I tried a few different things, and I thought, no, actually, I need complete focus for this. I need to immerse myself in this world, and it is quite lonely, writing a book, and quite a lot of self-pressure. I didn't feel pressure from Som, but I felt pressure from myself to do this story justice. So I couldn't have done it if I mean, I have no idea how these journalists pop out books while they're still working in the industry, because I don't have the brain space for all of that. It's like you just have to be in the moment. And there were times where I tried to structure when I was writing and it wouldn't come. I wouldn't be productive in that time that I'd carved out of my schedule to devote to the book, and I had to let it breathe and do it when the inspiration came. So yeah, I guess freeing yourself up to do that, whether it's going on a retreat or saying I'm going to just squirrel a bit more money away so that I can step out of the workforce for a while to do this. Giving yourself time is really important. And yeah, what else would
in terms of working with the subject or approaching the subject for that all important conversation?
Yeah, it depends on the person, but you got to be gentle. It's about communication, so you've got to build up quite a level of trust with that person for them to open up to you and be happy with what they tell you to be then out in the open. So it might be a case where, as the writer, you're bringing the person along with you and just sort of giving them a vision of how you think that will play out in the book, and getting some feedback along the way, not waiting till the thing is written and going, can you look at this and is everything okay? Like, I really brought Som along the way and got his feedback constantly about the structure or the things that I was going to include, and even so, he still kept saying to me, it's your project, I completely trust you, and thankfully he was very happy with the result.
Because writing a biography about a living person is different from someone who's no longer with us.
That's right, and you want to honor their story, and you don't want to sugarcoat it too much either. You want to keep it real, because there are different parts of our lives. There's color and light and shade, and there's lots of drama in Som's life, so I wanted to be able to capture that, but I also didn't want to be re-traumatizing him about things. So there's a delicate tightrope that you're walking all of the time when you're telling someone's story who is still alive.
Yeah, amazing. I'm so impressed, Kirsty. It's a terrific book. Have you got a copy that you can hold up? I can see some.
Yeah, it's got all my little sticky notes in there. So this is
beautiful.
Himalayan Dreams, and I took this photo when we were. This was the day that we got to Everest Base Camp, and I knew that I needed to take the cover of the book while in that trip in 2018. So I remember being here and there was heaps of people around, and I had to sort of shoo them away and say, Som, I just need you for 2 minutes on your own, let's go. And we took a series of photos, and I thought, as soon as I took this one, I was like, that is the cover of the book.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's I love the cover.
Yeah, me too. And I was very proud, because I did do a mock-up of the design myself, and it's been graphically designed to look beautiful, but that was my concept for the cover, and it's so nice that that's what I ended up with too. So
well executed once again, Kirsty.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for talking to us. That was fascinating.
Thank you very much for having me.